Hi, welcome to Lights Camera Author. I'm Jim Juno, and this is episode 397 of Lights Camera. I'm sorry, 297 of Lights Camera Author. And with me tonight is a very special guest. Her name is Kristin Casey, and she has a new book coming out called Casey Dancer, a memoir of dating, stripping, and some hot yoga. Kristin, welcome to Lights Camera Author.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be here.
Now, I was a bit worried when I first started reading your book because I was like, it's a bit
Yeah,
more racy.
it does start out a little racy. I know.
Yes, but it deals with the 10 years of your life between is it 2005 and 2015? Is
Yeah, well, so it covers from basically age 30 to age 40 or 42, I guess. But the first like five, um, the main focus is on like a 4 year period, 4 or 5 year period of my life from 2006 to 2010.
Mhm.
The first few chapters cover uh, like a 6 year period or something. And then the rest of the book is concentrated on my late 30s and a relationship that I had at that time and sort of the aftermath of the relationship.
Yes, and a lot of the time is with a person named Lalo,
Mhm.
and he was good for you and he wasn't good for you, if that would be accurate to say.
That's very well said. Yes.
Yes, and the part that he was good for you was that he was sounds like a I mean, he sounds like he had a very fulfilling life sexually with him.
Yes. It was a time in my life that I was both in love with someone and living with him. So we had access to each other every day. And so for the first time in my life, I was in a relationship where I could have all the sex I wanted, all the great sex I wanted, as often as I wanted, until, of course, the relationship started sort of falling apart, in which at what point I just didn't want to have sex with them anymore. Because when you lose attraction and respect for someone, all of a sudden they're not nearly as attractive and the sex isn't nearly as good. At least that's how it worked for me. But my first book, which you may know about, Rock Monster: My Life with Joe Walsh, that was a long-term relationship. I was very much in love and I lived with him, but we traveled all the time and we were cocaine addicts and alcoholics, and that really interferes with your sex life. So at the ripe age of 39, I finally met someone that yeah, I got to have it. And I'm not alone in believing that a healthy, fulfilling sex life is an important part of a life well lived, and so I finally got to have that a little bit later than I would have liked, but I got it.
Yes, and for those of you out there who the book isn't just about your sexual escapades, I'll
Yeah.
put it that way. It's about your struggle to get sober, your struggle to find a fulfillment in life itself, and also to try to become a full-time writer.
Mhm.
And I want, I do know that I've seen your name on the IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, a few times. You have a movie in production, I believe, that you're the producer of. Is it called The Champagne Room?
No, it's called The Champagne Room is actually one of my scripts that I never sold, which is funny enough, similar a little bit in tone to the one that just won Best Director and Best Picture at the
Picture.
Oscars. But it's about a stripper slash escort and a drug dealer, and a former drug dealer, and they fall in love, and she tries to straighten him out, and get him to get a legit job as a MMA promoter. And it's funny that you even bring that up, because that particular script was based on uh, a little bit on my and Lalo's relation. I based the characters on myself and Lalo, but the film that's in production, actually, it's called The Midnight Song, and I'm really excited about it. It's about an independent band that sneak into a recording studio to record their first album, and then a lot of the sort of relationship conflicts and drama that happen while they're in there knocking out this one night recording session um, that they've sort of stolen. So it's about the independent spirit. It's about creative pursuits. It's about ambition and creative pursuits, a little bit like my book is about my struggle to become a writer.
Hmm.
I'm passionate about that topic as well.
That's what another topic I want to touch on because again, in this book, you talk about how hard it is to get things published, to get your to get your books published, your screenplays published. Um, and a lot of people think that you go out to Hollywood and you just become overnight sensations. Well,
Yeah, there are very few of those.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of overnight sensations have a lot of work involved. Um,
Yeah, it might happen overnight after 10 years of struggle.
exactly. Was it hard writing this book for you?
Writing Casey Dancer, I wouldn't say it was hard. Writing Rock Monster was harder. First of all, I think I'm a better writer. I think it flows a little bit better. It certainly took me a lot less time to write this book. I also, thankfully for both books, I had a lot of journaling. And in particular for Casey Dancer, I journaled through all through my 30s, very, what's the word? Prodigiously, is that the right word?
Or
I journaled a lot.
diligently? Yeah.
Diligently, thank you. Yes. And so I had those to go back to because, memory can only get you so far. And it was really, and in my journals, I was very, very honest. It's a principle that I learned through my 12 steps, that you have to learn to be honest with yourself. And since nobody's reading your journals but you can write about how scared you are or embarrassed you are, or how much how much you're hurting, and all the stupid mistakes you made that you don't ever want anyone to know about, that you can put in your journal. And so because I was so diligent about keeping those journals, I was able to go through all of them. That part was a little painful because I'm in such a good place in my life right now. It's almost easy to forget how hard the struggle was, how hard I was working, how hard it was to maintain hope that I would ever get a book published or a screenplay sold, how much I was losing hope that I was ever going to um, be financially secure, because I was living a very hand to mouth life at the time. And I had a very bad back, and I was working in a physical job, and I was in constant pain. And I sort of remembered that intellectually, but going through my journals, like I relived it. So it was almost like emotionally hard. But because I had so much, I had put so much on the page, I was really able to write the book in a much faster. It took me 6 months. I went through my journals for 3 months, deciding what I was going to include and what I wasn't going to include, and taking notes and writing my outline and getting all that down. And then I wrote the book in 6 months, and it really flowed out of me. I did have it. I showed it to a number of editors. Most people show it to like one editor. I showed it to three, and I got such good input that I made a lot of changes in the end. But no, it was a joy, to be honest, if anything.
You touched on something which I would like to expound upon too, is that, you talked about being in physical pain. Now, in the book, of course, you talk about being a stripper. And I don't think, I'm not sure a lot of people realize how physical demanding that job is.
Yeah.
I mean, and especially with you had a bad back to go along with it.
Yeah. I didn't do any pole work. I mean, I didn't climb the pole. I could spin around on the pole, whatever, but I didn't climb the pole, because by the time they started putting poles in all the clubs, because they didn't do that back in the 80s, and
Yeah.
they started doing it in the 90s. And by the time I got sober and was ready to learn how to climb a pole, my back was already a mess. So I didn't do a lot of that. But even just like lap dancing, because I have the kind of back injury, a degenerated lumbar spine, that if I'm off center, even for a little bit, my back will start to seize up. And the more it seizes up, the more pain I'm in. And dancing, lap dancing, you're constantly off center. You're leaning forward in front of your customer, you're moving to the side, you're turning around, you're spinning, you're bending, you're constantly off center. And if you're on stage too, you can walk around with stiff hips, but you're not going to get a lot of tips. Like, you need to swivel those hips. They need to be rocking like they're on rollers, and so I loved dancing, and so I never let my back pain inhibit me much on stage. But I tell you, I would hobble off into the dressing room more often than I care to admit. I mean, I was 42 when I quit, and my back problems got a lot worse right after I turned 40. So the last 2 years of my stripping were just, I was in constant pain, constant severe pain, actually. Yeah.
But you were so good at it. I mean, you made a really nice. financial living off of it.
I did until the recession. It was really funny because so I had quit stripping and gone into real estate. So for the first few chapters of the book, I'm just a realtor, or I was a realtor. And then the first chapter I think is I talk about stripping, but then I kind of go back in time for a few chapters and I talk about being a realtor. And then I realized I'm working like 7 days a week as a realtor and I'm barely getting by. And so I thought, well, I'll just go back to stripping temporarily, a couple days a week to help bring in some extra money. And and I didn't want to do it because I thought I'm too old. I've done it for 10 years. That's a part of my life that's been long over. But I really needed the money. So I went back and this would have been late 2006. And I immediately started making more money per day than I was making per week as a realtor. So I start working 3 days a week. I'm working 6 days a week as a realtor, 3 days a week, a lot of those days overlapped, 3 days a week as a stripper. And in those 3 days, by the end of the year, I realized I was making twice as much in 3 days as I was making 6 days as a realtor. So I continued selling real estate on the side, but I was working it less and less and less and working more and more as a stripper. But what happened, as I'm sure you know, just a mere year and a half, 2 years later in 2008, is we entered the Great Recession. So the great money that I was making those, 3 days a week suddenly got cut, started dropping every few months by $100 a day until I was not. And then on top of that, my back pain was getting worse. So I could only work 2 or 3 days a week tops in constant pain for half the money that I was originally making when I had gone back at 39. And so and I was also trying to write. So I was working on short stories, one book, various screenplays, and then working as a stripper, no longer a realtor. And so towards the end of the book, part of the narrative arc of the book is about how in the beginning, I'm dating in a way that I'm hoping these men that I'm dating will help boost my self-esteem and help me, like they're going to teach me how to feel about myself. If you like me, then I'm worth something. If you don't like me, if you don't want to date me, then I'm not worth something. And over the course of the book, I grow up a lot and I mature and I realize that's not what dating is for. You don't need someone else to tell you how to feel about yourself. What really what gave me the self-esteem I needed was pursuing my passions. And stripping actually was a passion of mine. I loved the work. I loved the interactions with customers and making them feel better about themselves and bringing some excitement to their lives and some, feminine sexual nurturing. And so I really did love my work. I forgot where I was going with that. What was I saying?
You were saying first off, how physically demanding it is, and then about how you were
Oh,
making
the
twice as much.
recession.
The recession, yeah.
Yeah. So between the physical pain and then the recession, I eventually had to get out of it, which is going to be the subject of my third book. But it ended up being fortuitous. But the arc of the story, I get to a point where I realize if I'm going to love myself more and value myself more, if I would just pursue my passions and stop looking for men to tell me how to feel about myself, right? Like that relationship with Lalo, that to circle back, you had said it was a great thing for me and a real struggle for me. And that was partly because when someone loves you as much as Lalo loved me, it's very healing. And you suddenly, it suddenly occurs to you when someone just loves you consistently and fully every day for months at a time, like, oh my gosh, I guess I am worth love. And that's really healing for anybody, especially someone who has trauma in their past and trauma around relationships. It was a challenge because he crossed my boundaries every single day, and I was not good I wasn't good at setting boundaries with him. But even that is a good thing because that relationship is where I learned to set boundaries and to put my foot down. So in the long run, it actually ended up being a good thing for me
Yeah.
too.
And with you recovering, excuse me, with you being a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, um, I'm, and he was not sober when you first met him. Was that almost like uh, did it tempt you to backslide? I guess what I'm.
No, I never really had much impetus to relapse. I never relapsed once I got sober at 29, clean and sober at 29. But um what happened was when I met somebody who was still drinking and still using, as Lalo was, is I told myself, well, we can never have a real relationship because I'm clean and sober, and that just wouldn't be healthy. And I wouldn't even be attracted to somebody. Like I could never fall in love with someone who's drinking like that, or who's not clean and sober, or just more, emotionally mature. I was wrong. I ended up falling in love with them. And so that ended up, that's going to start off a kind of unhealthy relationship right there. It didn't make me want to relapse. It made me want to get him sober. And I did eventually get him to go to AA. It just didn't last.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like how every chapter you have a mood that you have when you were writing that chapter. I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
Yeah. Well, I think you're referring to the blog posts that
Yes.
interspersed throughout the chapters. Yeah. So when I wrote that blog on the Live Journal platform, whenever you go to write a new post, it will ask you what your mood is. And it would give you a drop down menu to choose from. And so I would usually choose from that drop down menu. So you can kind of tell if I'm in a sarcastic mood or if I'm in a happy mood or whatever, like how that blog post is going to read. That's either going to be like really sarcastic and cutting and biting, or it's going to be kind of happy, funny, silly.
I tell you, when you and at the very I don't want to go to the very end of the book. I don't want to give away the ending. Spoiler alert, she's still alive, okay? Anyway,
Yeah,
the
he's still alive.
but you do become a very high paid escort.
Mhm.
Um, is that just an off? Is that still just an offshoot of stripping and looking and having men? You
I
needing
say,
men to tell? Yeah.
I will say that stripping was probably a doorway for me, but at the same time, I remember being very young, like I'm guessing maybe 8 or 10 years old, and seeing some sort of Western on TV with with the brothel and Miss Kitty or whatever, and just being like very intrigued. Like my radar went up, like, what is this about? There are women who rent their bodies out for a living. Like
Yeah.
there was something about me that found that very intriguing from a young age. So while I became a stripper at 18, um, the whole idea of prostitution, or what I would call upscale companionship, or, high-end prostitution, I guess you could call it. I always found it to be sort of compelling and fascinating, and it looked like fun. And so it was something I actually dabbled in when I was 18 as a stripper, because you get offers. And I wasn't
Mhm.
really doing it for the money. I did it because I was fascinated by the whole concept of it. I didn't do it often. And then I met Joe a couple years after I started stripping. So I didn't do it anymore for a long time. But then I got back into it partly for the money, because I had gone back to stripping at 39 and everything was great. And like I said, until the recession. And then I thought, well, I can bring in a little extra money by going back to the escorting. Well, what happened during the recession to strip clubs all over the country is that so many new girls showed up because they were hurting. Maybe they were married and their husbands lost their job, or maybe they were single and they lost their job, but everybody needed extra money. So we had this huge influx of women who'd never stripped before, and they didn't understand that they didn't have to give, pardon my language, blowjobs in the VIP room to make a living. You don't have to do that. You can just dance. But they didn't know that. They had no negotiating
Mm.
skills. They didn't know how to set boundaries. So all of a sudden we had all these new girls breaking every rule because the customers were talking them into it and they just wanted the fast money. Well, once you do that, you train the customers. Well, if these guys are getting it, then every customer wants it. So in 2008 and 2009, I went from being an entertainer. I would walk into the club every day believing I was there to dance and entertain and have conversations and just be sexy and erotic, but not, have penetration or even, all that much touching. A little bit of
Yes.
touching was normal. To all of a sudden, I'm having to turn down what I would call offensive offers for, I would, every now and then you would get and somebody would ask you for a $200 blowjob in the VIP room, and you'd be like, no, thanks, I'm not going to do that. And he'd be like, okay, thought I would just took a shot. Then all of a sudden I'm going in there every single day. Somebody's asking me for a $50 blowjob and acting offended when I say no, and telling me, well, she did it. Everyone else is doing it. And I'm like the only one not doing it. So at that point I said to myself, look, if this is how I'm going to have to make a living now, because I wasn't, stripping was just not paying the bills anymore. Because if you weren't turning tricks in the VIP room, you weren't making money. And so I just said, look, if this is how I'm going to have to do it, I'm going to do it in a 5-star hotel room for, 4 figures, not 3 figures, and certainly
Mhm.
not 2 figures. So I decided to go to the sugar daddy sites that had kind of, a few of them had popped up, and there were lovely upscale gentlemen on there who just wanted some companionship, a woman to take to dinner, maybe take on business trips, and yes, have sex with. And I liked sex, and I was good at that, and I liked men, and I was good company. I thought this could be a way to make a little extra money, because I thought, I'm 42. Who's going to hire a 42-year-old escort? Maybe 1 or 2 gentlemen in their 60s or something. What I didn't realize was that I did look much younger than my age. And a lot of men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s wanted someone their own age who looked younger, because they could relate to her, they could talk to her, they could really establish a genuine connection with her. Because that was my thing. I didn't want it to just be about the sex. I wanted it to be about the building a friendship and a real connection. And that's what excites me. That's what I'm passionate about. Anonymous sex and casual sex don't really do anything for me, but genuine intimacy, which is what my whole book is about. I spent my entire 30s learning how to drop my walls and allow myself to be genuinely intimate with my friends, my new friends, and men that I was dating. And so in my professional life as an escort, or what I call a professional companion, because that's a little bit different, it's someone who establishes a real heart connection with her clients. I thought that's a viable career for me. And I was so deluged with offers. I thought I'd get 1 or 2 offers. I had hundreds of emails with by the end of the week, and most of them couldn't afford me because I put my price quite high.
Yeah.
And but that's all right. I narrowed it down to a workable number, and I went on some coffee dates, and I met some wonderful men. And the next thing you know, I had a thriving business as a professional companion. And within 2 years, I was the highest priced professional companion in the state of Texas. And that lasted for another couple of years. I continued to work for a long time. Um, but I eventually then, as I got older, I got into my 50s. I thought, well, I'm going to definitely, nobody's going to want a professional companion in her 50s, but even that wasn't true, oddly enough. But at some point, it ran its course for me, and I became a certified sexuality counselor, and I used it in my work as an intimacy coach, working with men who were trying to overcome their own intimacy issues. So I kind of came full circle.
Yeah, and I want to let everybody know this book is not about sex. Okay, I mean, yeah, that's a part of it. Okay,
Yeah.
but it is a book about personal growth, and 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 how you feel about yourself. You know, and how you came to feel this way about yourself,
Mhm.
um, and it's a struggle. I mean, yes, I will say it's racy, like we said at the beginning of the interview. It is. There are some racy parts in it, but some very racy parts that I've reread over and over. No, and yeah, no, but it tells more about your growth as a human being. And now, being in Hollywood, or trying to break into the Hollywood with movies and screenplays and stuff. You hear this story so often that the casting couch and all that, all the things that are going. I mean, Nickelodeon had just this past summer or past fall, had a whole article. There was a whole TV series on what happened at Nickelodeon. Um, did you encounter any of that?
No, I didn't really, thankfully. But by the time I started writing my screenplays and sending them out to Hollywood, I was living and working in Austin. I suspect, had I been a younger woman living and working in Hollywood, that it would have been an
Mm.
issue. I mean, I've heard stories. One of the reasons I probably didn't make it was because I did want to stay in Austin, because working as a professional companion in Austin, I was doing so well because I was working in Dallas, Austin, and Houston. So I had 3 huge cities to choose from, and it worked out really well. I could have moved to Hollywood, been a professional companion out in Hollywood, and networked, because to make it as a screenwriter in Hollywood, it really helps to be out there and to be going to parties and just going and meeting people and working at a low-level job at some studio, so you can meet high-powered people and get them to read your stuff. And so it's a lot of networking and making friends. And so it turns out, so that kind of thing can help you get discovered, but it can also put you in a position where you're getting hit on, and hey, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine, or I'll get your
Mhm.
screenplay I'll get you into a pitch meeting if you,
Yeah.
suck my whatever. So I didn't have to deal with that. But yeah, sure, those stories are legion.
Now, you mentioned the movie that won Best Picture, Honora.
Mhm.
And you're right. It's very similar to a movie that you or one of your screenplays.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you now is Hollywood do you think is more open to stories like that now?
If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I probably would have said, I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe a little bit. But the way they cleaned up at the Oscars kind of makes you, I mean, it made me excited. I'm telling you, I yelped, I jumped up, I cried a little. I was so excited because I just thought not only did Sean Baker uh, really capture the heart of authentically what it means to be a stripper slash escort at that level. There are different levels, there are streetwalkers, there are mid-range escorts, there are high-end escorts. But he really captured this um, that experience. And that actress, Mickey Madison, did a great job portraying her. I thought she was so authentic. And in the end, I don't want to give any spoiler alerts, but one of the things about that movie I loved so much that I write about a little bit in my book as well, I think, is this class system that we have set up where, especially during the recession, creative types and laborers go through a lot. And you have in that movie, you had the oligarchs who are at the top of the food chain, and then you have the escorts who are at the very bottom, and never the twain shall meet. And they did in that movie, and it really drives home, especially to that character, how powerless some of us really are in the world. And that's where I was at, when I was in the years that this book was set in, Casey Dancer, my daily struggle getting out of bed was like, do I have any power in this world? Am I ever going to get my books published? Am I ever even going to get a meeting with a good agent, and uh, or am I just going to be a laborer my whole life and struggle my whole life? But you have to, by that time, I guess I believed in myself enough, and I believed in my writing enough, and I didn't have anything else anywhere else to go, that I just kept plugging away. And I think a little bit of luck was involved. And I got my first book published at 50. I was writing for 15 years before that, regularly, 20 years before I got my first book published. I got my first short stories published probably, sooner, but you can't make money off short stories, right?
Yeah, no, you can't. No, and you can, but you got another book coming out after this one,
I do. It's
which
going to be all about my professional companion years. Yeah,
yes,
I hope to start writing it later this year.
fantastic. Well, the new book that's out, is it out yet, or it's coming out in April?
Oh, it comes out in April, so 5 weeks, I
And
think, on the 22nd
yeah,
of,
but
yeah,
you
you
can
can pre-order
pre-order.
it. Yeah,
Pre-order it now at Amazon or BN.com, or go into your brick and mortar store and say, I want to get a copy of Casey Dancer. Casey Dancer, a memoir of dating, stripping, and a little hot yoga.
exactly.
And the author's name is Kristin Casey. And Kristin, it's been a lot of fun tonight. I really appreciate you being on Light the Camera Author.
Oh, I was delighted to be asked. I love your show. And this is my first, I've got a couple interviews lined up already, but you're the first one for this book. So thanks for getting me off to a good start.
Oh, thank you.